Making technology is an expensive process. You have to pay the designers, you have to pay for the materials to build it with, and then you have to pay for all the work that goes into putting it all together. Hopefully, when that's all done, you'll get some money or value out of all of your expenditure for a while. Further down the line, when your creation no longer has a purpose, it's time to write it off or dispose of it. There are surely better ways to dispose of an unwanted piece of technology than you're about to see in this video, though. These are all cases of shocking abandoned technology. If you ever visit the forests near St. Petersburg in Russia, you'll have the opportunity to meet some colossal mechanical monsters from the mining past of the region. You'll find them in Kingisepp, dominating the skyline. 3 of the walking excavators are still standing, left to rust in the same place they were when all mining activity ceased at the site many years ago. Unlike crawler excavators, walking excavators were designed to go about their business with minimal impact to the soil they stand on, despite weighing several thousand tons. The machines have giant legs, which are powered by what are effectively hydraulic shoes. Very slowly, they can walk across the landscape one step at a time. These vast machines are unlikely ever to move again, though. Their purpose has been served, and now they're only of interest to the tourists who come to see them for a photo opportunity. The 3 remaining walking excavators used to have many more brothers at the quarry, but all have since been scrapped. One day, those that are left will likely meet with the same fate. The Burren Shuttle program was supposed to be the Soviet Union's answer to the American Space Shuttle program. It could, and some would say should, have given the USSR supremacy in space, but it was never to be. Only one of the Burren space shuttles ever went into space, and that was only for a brief test flight in 1988. Although more shuttles were built, none of them ever flew. 2 of them are now falling to pieces in a long-forgotten hangar in Kazakhstan's Baikonur Cosmodrome. It's unknown how close to completion these 2 forgotten spaceships got, but they seem to have all the relevant parts in place. The exteriors are complete, and there's plenty of 1980s technology inside the cockpit. If it wasn't for the thick layer of dust and bird droppings that the forgotten shuttles have accumulated during their years in the darkness, they'd probably still look ready to take to space tomorrow, if it were required of them. Sadly, they'll never be anything more than old curiosities now. The TSS Duke of Lancaster is a fine steamship that deserved a better fate than the one it's been left to endure. Built and launched back in 1955, its first purpose was to serve as a passenger ferry between Heysham in England and Belfast in Northern Ireland. Over time, it expanded its range and began to take visitors to places like Spain, Denmark, Norway, and the Netherlands. There was space for 1,200 standard-class passengers on board, as well as 600 first-class guests enjoying a VIP experience. That all came to an end in 1974, when the Heysham to Belfast route was closed, and the Duke of Lancaster was deemed to be behind the times in terms of offering more modern conveniences. For example, the ability to act as a car ferry. It meandered around minor routes for a little longer, but then docked in North Wales in 1979 to be converted into an entertainment attraction called the Fun Ship, with amusement arcades and licensed bars on board. Local authorities never fell in love with having the Fun Ship open on their turf, citing health and safety issues. It was shut down in the mid-1980s and is now just a rusty monument to yesteryear. Submarines are supposed to be in the water, so perhaps it isn't a great surprise to see that this rare Japanese midget sub is in such poor condition. It's been out on the land for far too long. It's also a long way from home. These pictures were taken on Kiska Island, which belongs to Alaska. Some of the islands in the chain that Kiska belongs to were occupied by the Japanese during the Second World War, which explains what the old A-type submarine is doing here. The 78-foot-long sub has been described by some people as resembling a killer whale in design, and is one of at least 6 of its class that were brought to the island in 1942. Despite its narrow design, 2 Japanese soldiers were expected to man the submarine at the same time, which must have made for a very cramped environment. By late 1943, the Japanese had been driven from the island, and they didn't have time to pack up all their equipment before they left. This poor sub got left behind. Part of the reason that people buy luxury cars is to show them off. If they're not on the road, they should be safely in your garage so you can boast about them to your friends when they come to see you. The last place they should end up is a junkyard, but there's a whole load of them here at this dedicated luxury car wrecking yard in Nuneaton, England. The yard is called Flying Spares and has been in business for 20 years breaking down unwanted vintage cars, with a particular focus on Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. Although statistics on such matters are hard to find, it's thought to be the largest luxury car graveyard in the world. Most of the forgotten cars come from the 1970s or 1980s. Although, as you can see from the pictures, there's also the occasional Continental GT or another more modern car. The more recent vehicles have usually been taken to the yard after being deemed past the point of repair after a crash. Where possible, the yard extracts working parts from what's left of the cars and sells them to owners of luckier cars that are still in working condition. This derelict submarine wreck is known as the Yellow Submarine of Coney Island Creek. Although unlike the Yellow Submarine in the famous song by the Beatles, it isn't yellow anymore, and you wouldn't want to live in it. A Navy Yard ship fitter from Brooklyn had the submarine built as part of a bold scheme to raise the wreck of the Andrea Doria, which was a luxury cruise liner that sank near Nantucket in 1956. A careless crane operator ruined his dream in 1971 as the sub was prepared to launch. It was supposed to be lowered into the water slowly and delicately so it could be gradually filled with ballast. But the operator simply dumped it in as fast as the crane would allow, and so it flipped over and sank immediately. The shipfitter paid for the sub to be dredged back up to the surface, but it was too badly damaged to be used for its original intended purpose. Nowadays, the only passengers it serves are the brave souls who sit on it to use it as an unorthodox fishing platform. Our next collection of abandoned equipment comes from a top-secret location in Russia. And as soon as you see it, you'll understand why the photographer who brought us these images wants to keep the location secret. They probably weren't supposed to be there. This is a collection of relics from Russia's space age, including ships and ship parts that were intended for both manned and unmanned flight. There are even Soyuz capsules here, which should be surely of interest to the public if someone were to come and collect them and put them in a museum. Pictures from inside the capsules show us just how little room there was for the cosmonauts who once traveled in them. Being inside one of these while up in space must have been terrifying. Possibly the most interesting capsule in the whole collection comes from a Soyuz TM-32, and it looks like it has been signed by the 3 cosmonauts who flew inside it: Konstantin Kozy, Cloudy Heigner, and Viktor Afanasyev. The scorch marks on the exterior of some of the capsules show us how dangerous re-entering the Earth's atmosphere can be. If you enjoy science fiction, you might be aware of a subgenre called steampunk, which imagines a world where electricity had never become the default way of powering things, and steam power still rules. This steam shovel is the kind of technology you'd expect to see in a world like that. We think it was made by Bucharest, although as there's no manufacturer's logo on the rusty old machine, it's hard to tell. We do know what it was used for, though. It played a vital role in digging the 90-mile-long Davidson Ditch Aqueduct in Alaska during the 1920s. It's also thought to have been used in the construction of the Panama Canal prior to that. Sadly, nobody seems to have found a use for it once the aqueduct project was completed, and so it's been standing alone and disused for almost a century. Even with all the rust, though, we can see where it came from. The name of the town of Evansville in Indiana is stamped proudly on the side. The Galaxy must have been a proud cruise liner once, but it's not looking its best these days. Information about the enormous boat hotel is difficult to come by because nobody knows how it came to be cemented to a beach in Koh Chang, Thailand, and the locals don't want to talk about it. Apparently, the ship has attracted superstitious beliefs because people are said to have gone to explore it and never come back. If that's true, then perhaps it's a ghost ship in more ways than one. The condition of the interior suggests that it was abandoned in a hurry. There are still personal items in some of the cabinets, and the guest rooms still have beds and bedding. Some parts of the ship are in better condition than others, but the cats and dogs who live on it now seem to be perfectly content with their unusual home. The ship is huge and must have cost hundreds of millions of dollars to build when it was brand new. But the only business it attracts now is a $20 visitor fee charged by the one security guard who keeps an eye on it. This might look like a space shuttle's external fuel tank, but it isn't. It is, in fact, a full-scale model of a space shuttle's external fuel tank. Why would anyone go to the trouble of building such a thing and then abandon it when their work was completed? The answer is that NASA built it, but never intended for it to be used in a real flight. Instead, they used it to stress test their whole design, which is a duty the model performed for 3 years at Alabama's Marshall Space Flight Center between 1977 and 1980. From its retirement until 2013, it was a display piece at the Kennedy Space Center. After that, it was sold into private hands at an auction, with the winning bidder living in Keystone Heights, Florida. They managed to get it as far as Green Cove Springs using a barge and a tugboat, but then it appears that they ran out of ideas as to how to get it any further. It can't go on the roads because highways would have to be closed and power lines would have to be disconnected. With seemingly no way of moving it, it's been left where it is. The forgotten hulk of the GM Aerotrain is a testament to General Motors' failed vision of the future of rail transport during the 1950s. GM used to supply engines and other parts to train companies during the 1940s and 1950s, and so, over time, they developed the idea of building their own train. A train that would be cheaper to build and move faster than any of their rivals. They got the speed right, but they forgot about the comfort factor. The Aerotrain was made out of aluminum and was therefore lighter than almost anything else on rails during its era. The low weight made it capable of reaching and exceeding 100 miles per hour. Back in the 50s, that was some seriously impressive speed. Sadly, the speed came at a price. Passengers were rattled around inside it as it turned corners, and the lack of downforce meant that climbing up hills was a real struggle for the train. By 1957, it became clear that the idea was impractical, and so now the unsuccessful trains are museum pieces. There's a McDonald's restaurant in almost every major town and city in the world. The company makes an incredible amount of money, and that's why they can build a whole steel and glass barge for a one-off event, and then abandon it as soon as the event is over. This is the so-called Knick Barge, which was built for the Expo World Fair when it visited Vancouver in Canada during 1986. The vessel was intended firstly to give attendees to the fair somewhere to eat, and secondly, to showcase the unconventional locations that McDonald's believed they'd be using as restaurants in years to come. The whole McDonald's on the water idea never really caught on, and the restaurant moved out of the barge on the last day of the fair. Since then, there have been repeated attempts to turn it into a bar or another restaurant, but none have ever come to fruition. The condition of the McBarge isn't terrible, so the chance is still there for an enterprising business person if they want to take ownership of it. But it's gathering more rust as the years go by.
Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, and you will be the first to know when a new video comes out. Thank you for watching, and see you soon.